Have you ever wondered what happens when deep-seated prejudice collides with unyielding determination? I want to share the story of Darius Banks, a young man whose early days at Westfield Academy set the stage for an extraordinary tale of struggle and ultimately a spectacular act of revenge. Anthony arrived at the imposing brick school, its manicured lawns and stately stone pillars a symbol of a world where he felt like an outsider. The son of a respected commercial airline pilot, he carried with him a legacy of excellence and hope, even as he battled the harsh judgment of those who believed he did not belong. Every step he took on campus was heavy with the weight of expectation and bias, his worn backpack and slightly askew tie a constant reminder of the uphill battle ahead. From the moment he set foot in the hallways, Anthony faced a relentless barrage of snide remarks and cold stares. A tall, smug young man named Jackson, captain of the lacrosse team, wasted no time belittling him with a dismissive handshake and a cutting remark about being a scholarship student. This simple insult revealed a cruel hierarchy that divided the students into a privileged elite in the front rows and a marginalized group relegated to the back, where Anthony was forced to sit. His teacher, Ms. Winters, with her icy demeanor and severe bun, treated him as an inconvenience rather than a promising mind. When Anthony confidently answered a physics question, citing the acceleration due to gravity as 32.2 feet per second squared, her eyes flashed with disdain, and a ripple of laughter followed from the well-to-do students. Throughout his classes, the subtle yet vicious discrimination weighed on him. Anthony's isolation grew with every dismissive glance and every calculated act of cruelty by Jackson and his cohorts, who deliberately stole his textbook and bumped him in the hall. In contrast, Sophia, a kind-hearted classmate who had herself suffered under the system's biases, offered gentle words of encouragement. Together, they navigated the treacherous social landscape, witnessing how the school celebrated success only when it came from the right background. The injustice of it all stirred something powerful in Anthony. Each slight, each act of mockery fanned the flames of a burning determination to turn his pain into a force for change. He vowed that one day he would unleash a response so magnificent that even his oppressors would be left gasping in astonishment, a retribution that would shake the very foundations of Westfield Academy. As the announcement for an upcoming career day echoed through the halls that day, Darius Banks resolved that his journey of quiet endurance would soon give way to a dramatic, unforgettable act of revenge, a response that would transform his suffering into a triumphant legacy of justice. With each passing moment in that cold, segregated institution, Anthony's quiet resilience grew stronger as he meticulously planned his ultimate comeback, promising that no act of cruelty would ever go unanswered. He knew his destiny was imminent. Ms. Winters held up her hand for silence as she spoke to the class. "I've already secured several impressive speakers for our physics class," she announced, her voice taking on a bright tone that did little to mask the cold arrogance beneath. She mentioned Mr. Bennett from Bennett Aviation and gave a slight nod toward Tyler, whose self-satisfied grin was impossible to miss. "But then," she continued, "we have room for 2 more parent presenters." The air in the room thickened as every student registered the unspoken rule. Only those whose parents had achieved the extraordinary were welcome. Sophia leaned in and murmured to Anthony, translation, "If your parents aren't rich or famous enough to impress her, you're out." Anthony's heart sank further as he listened. Every word cut deep, especially when he remembered how his own father, Captain James Rivers, had fought hard against every obstacle. His father had risen from humble beginnings in the Air Force to become one of the very few black pilots in a prestigious commercial airline, now commanding a Boeing 787 on transatlantic routes. Yet here, in this polished institution, Ms. Winters' criteria seemed designed to dismiss such hard-earned accomplishments. As permission forms were handed out, Tyler couldn't resist turning his seat and jeering loudly. "So, scholarship, what do your parents do? Janitor? Bus driver?" The remark echoed down the hall, drawing a mix of snickers and uneasy glances from other students. Anthony's throat tightened. When he finally mustered the courage to speak, his voice trembled as he answered, "My mum's a hospital administrator and my dad is a pilot." Almost immediately, Tyler burst out with a mocking laugh. "And Dad? Let me guess. He's not even in the picture. The cutting assumption stung, dredging up every past moment when Anthony had been made to feel less than, simply because his family did not fit the narrow mold of privilege that Westfield Academy demanded. During the class, as Ms. Winters reiterated the high standards for Career Day, insisting that only careers demanding advanced education and exceptional achievement would be celebrated, her tone dripped with disdain. "Commercial pilots," she sneered, "are essentially, what did your father call them? Bus drivers of the sky." The front rows erupted in laughter, while the back of the room, where Anthony and other scholarship students sat, fell into an even deeper silence. Sophia's quiet protest came immediately. Ms. Winters, becoming an airline pilot actually requires thousands of flight hours, extensive training, and continuous certification. They're responsible for hundreds of lives every flight. But Ms. Winters' smile only tightened, and she dismissed the comment with a curt, "Thank you for your input, Miss Garcia, though I don't recall asking for it." After class, with the permission form still clutched in his hand, Anthony approached Miss Winters' desk. Her gaze was icy as she said in a lower voice, "Mr. Rivers, I understand you're new here, but at Westfield we maintain certain standards. Career Day is about inspiring students toward excellence, not settling for adequate employment." Anthony's voice wavered as he defended his father's legacy. "My father is a senior captain. He was one of the youngest to be promoted to international routes in the airline's history." With a dismissive wave, she replied, "Well, I suppose someone has to transport the vacationers to their destinations." Her words, meant to belittle, instead ignited a spark of indignation in him. That evening, at home, the tension took on a more personal note. Anthony sat at the dinner table, pushing food around his plate as his parents discussed their day. His mother, Vanessa, was the first to sense something was off. "Anthony, is everything all right at school?" she asked gently, her eyes searching his face. Nearby, his father, Captain James Rivers, stood with his uniform jacket hanging neatly by the door, the captain's stripes a proud reminder of every barrier he had shattered. Anthony finally broke his silence. "There's something I need to tell you about Career Day." Captain Rivers set down his fork, his eyes narrowing in concern. "Go on," he urged quietly. Anthony recounted the day, the sneering laughter, the cruel remarks about his family background, and most of all, Ms. Winters' dismissive tone that reduced his father's decades of hard work to a flippant joke. She said our pilots are like bus drivers of the sky, and Tyler kept mocking me, saying things that made me feel so small. Vanessa's expression hardened as she interjected, "This is exactly the kind of elitism I was so worried about when you transferred here." Captain Rivers took a deep breath before speaking, his voice calm but resolute. "Son, people like her will always find reasons to look down on others. The real question is whether you let those reasons define you. When I was told I wasn't cut out for commercial aviation because of my background, I had two choices: walk away or prove them wrong. I chose to excel, not for their approval, but to show that their prejudice was meaningless." His eyes, though tired, shone with an inner fire. "You have a legacy to uphold, and if you let them belittle you, you're giving them the power to keep you down." Anthony's heart pounded as he listened, feeling both the weight of his family's struggles and the fierce determination to retaliate. "I'm scared, Dad. What if I submit your name for Career Day and she rejects it again? What if it just makes me look weak?" Captain Rivers reached out, placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Weakness is not in speaking up for who you are. The moment you let someone else define your worth, you lose. I have faced more discrimination in my life than you can imagine, and every time I did, I turned it into fuel. This is your chance to do the same. Not just for you, but for every student who's ever been made to feel less than they are." The conversation left Anthony with a storm of emotions: deep hurt, simmering anger, and an undeniable resolve to prove the critics wrong. The very next day at school, with trembling hands but a determined heart, he walked to Ms. Winters' desk once more, the Career Day form clutched tightly. Every step down the polished corridor felt like a march toward revolution, a silent vow to reclaim his dignity. The memory of Tyler's cruel laughter and Miss Winters' icy dismissal echoed in his ears, fueling his resolve. No longer would he accept the system's harsh judgment. Instead, he would turn it into his triumph. As whispers of change began to circulate among the students, a palpable tension filled the hallways. Anthony could feel every curious, disbelieving gaze as he submitted his father's name for the presentation. In that quiet act of defiance, he knew he had set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of Westfield Academy. Behind him, Sophia's encouraging smile reassured him that he wasn't alone, that many who had been sidelined by the elitist system stood with him in spirit. In the coming days, the oppressive veneer of the academy started to crack. Students who had long suffered in silence found their voices, united by the courage of one young man who dared to challenge the status quo. Meanwhile, Ms. Winters and Tyler, so accustomed to their unchallenged power, began to sense a shift. Their casual cruelty was no longer met with quiet resignation, but with a growing defiance that threatened to expose the hypocrisy of their privileged world. Anthony's act of submitting his father's name was not just a personal victory, it was a rallying cry. He resolved to confront the very system that had belittled him for so long. Every discriminatory remark, every dismissive glance, became ammunition in his plan for a comeback that would leave everyone, even his oppressors, utterly astonished. The stage was being set for a dramatic showdown on career day, where the true measure of excellence would finally be recognized. In that moment, as he walked the halls of Westfield Academy, Darius Banks no longer felt like a silent victim, but a warrior armed with the legacy of his father's perseverance and a promise to reclaim what was rightfully his. With his submission complete, Anthony braced himself for the challenges ahead. The battle lines had been drawn between the forces of elitist privilege and those who had been unfairly marginalized. And in the midst of it all, he vowed to deliver a response so spectacular that it would force every member of the academy to confront the deep-seated injustices they had long ignored. The forthcoming career day was not merely an event, it was the spark that would ignite a long-overdue reckoning, one where the truth about hard work, determination, and undeniable talent would shine brighter than any preconceived notion of worth. Darius Banks slid the career day form across Miss Winters' desk with a steady hand as he announced, "My father would like to participate." His voice carried a quiet determination despite the storm of prejudice swirling around him. Ms. Winters glanced at the paper, her eyebrows rising ever so slightly as she read the details. Captain James Johnson, Atlantic Airlines. Without offering any praise or encouragement, she set the form aside and said in a clipped tone, "We'll see if we have room in the schedule." That brief remark, delivered with all the careless indifference of someone who had already decided who was worthy, ignited something deep within. As he turned to leave, Tyler, ever the emblem of entitlement, stepped forward with his own form. In a tone dripping with arrogance, he announced to the room, "Ms. Winters, my father wanted me to tell you personally that he's bringing the prototype designs for the new Bennett 15 jet. He said you'd appreciate the physics applications of the wing modifications." Ms. Winters' smile brightened as she responded, "Wonderful, Tyler. Please tell your father we're honored he's making time for us." Tyler's eyes sparkled with smug satisfaction as he added, "I've already reserved the prime morning slot for his presentation. Sorry, scholarship." The barbs in his voice cut sharply. Darius felt his temper flare as he interjected, "My father is a real pilot." His voice trembled with a mix of anger and hurt as he continued, "He's responsible for hundreds of lives every time he flies." Tyler scoffed dismissively, "Please, my father designs the planes. Your dad just happens to drive." With that, Tyler sneered, as if it were common knowledge that piloting a plane was as simple as pushing buttons. Ms. Winters, seemingly tired of the bickering yet unwilling to challenge Tyler's privilege, interjected indulgently, "That is enough, gentlemen. Mr. Banks, I have received your form." The air in the room seemed to thicken with tension, as Darius, seeing past the polite facade, looked directly at her and declared, "You know what, Ms. Winters? My father has 3 advanced degrees. He flew combat missions before you ever taught your first class, and he's broken barriers you've never even approached." The classroom fell silent as even Tyler looked taken aback by Darius's outburst. Ms. Winters' face hardened instantly. "That will be quite enough, Mr. Banks. Perhaps you'd like to continue this discussion with Principal Harrington." Gathering every ounce of courage, Darius replied evenly, "I think that's an excellent idea." And with that, he strode out of the room, the murmurs of his peers following him like an ominous echo. Outside in the hallway, Sophia caught up with him, her eyes wide with concern. "Darius, what were you thinking?" she asked softly. But he kept walking, adrenaline still coursing through him as he muttered, "I'm thinking it's time someone challenged the way things work around here." The weight of injustice pressed heavily on him. At Westfield Academy, where the glimmering facade of tradition masked a deep-seated elitism, Darius was seen as nothing more than a scholarship kid whose worth was measured solely by his background. That afternoon, in the grand yet suffocating principal's office, a room reeking of old money and tradition with dark wooden panels and portraits of distinguished alumni, Principal Harrington, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, regarded Darius with practiced neutrality. He stated flatly, "Ms. Winters says you were disruptive and disrespectful in her class." Darius, sitting straight-backed in the leather chair, replied, "Sir, I was defending my father's profession after Miss Winters dismissed it as unimportant." The principal's eyes narrowed as he asked, "And you felt that justified raising your voice to a teacher?" Darius admitted quietly, "No, sir, but I don't think it's right for a teacher to laugh at what my father does for a living." Principal Harrington removed his glasses and polished them carefully with a cloth from his drawer before saying, "Darius, Westfield has certain traditions. Our career day is meant to inspire students toward the kind of excellence this institution values." With a bitter edge in his voice, Darius couldn't help but ask, "So excellence only counts if it comes with the right background?" The principal's expression tightened as he responded, "That is not what I said. But I will say this, challenging a teacher's authority regardless of your reasons is unacceptable at Westfield." Darius left that meeting with a week of detention and a warning letter in his file, a punishment that felt all the more unjust because it fell heavily on him while Ms. Winters faced no consequences for her own disdainful behavior. That evening at home, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken pain as Darius sat at his desk, staring blankly at his physics homework. His mother, Vanessa, knocked gently before entering his room. "The school called," she said softly as she sat on the edge of his bed. Darius nodded without looking up. "I got detention," he muttered. Vanessa added quietly, "They mentioned you stood up for your father." Turning to face her, Darius's voice cracked. "They made it sound like I was just being rebellious." "Didn't they?" Vanessa's smile was sad as she replied, "More or less." With a tender yet firm tone, she said, "Tell me what really happened." Darius then recounted every painful detail, the sneering laughter, the cruel dismissal of his father's accomplishments, and the relentless arrogance of Ms. Winters and Tyler. "The worst part," he concluded in a choked whisper, "is that Dad will probably still want to do this career day thing, and they'll just find some other way to humiliate him, or me." Vanessa wrapped her arms around him, reassuring him that his father had faced far worse than a prejudiced physics teacher. "Your father always says that he can handle himself," she murmured, "but why should he have to keep facing this? Why should either of you?" After a moment of heavy silence, she added, "Come downstairs. There's something I want to show you." In the living room, Vanessa pulled a leather-bound photo album from the bookshelf. They sat together on the couch as she opened the album to reveal photos Darius had never seen before. Images of his father in his Air Force uniform, standing proudly beside an F-16 fighter jet. "Your father was one of only 4 black pilots in his squadron," she explained softly. Darius listened intently as she turned the page to show a picture of Captain James Johnson receiving a commendation. "He let his excellence speak for him," she said, her voice trembling with both pride and sorrow. Darius protested, "But it's not fair that he has to be exceptional just to be treated with basic respect." Vanessa sighed. "Sometimes changing minds means getting them to see you differently. Excellence can be a foot in the door, even when that door should have been open all along." They continued flipping through the album, seeing images of his father's graduation from flight school, his first cockpit photo, and his promotion to captain. Every image was a testament to his perseverance in the face of lowered expectations and quiet, insidious prejudice. Vanessa's final words echoed in Darius's heart. Your father has never backed down from a challenge, and he's never needed anyone's validation to know his own worth." Just then the front door opened and his father, Captain James Johnson, entered the room with a warm smile that quickly faded into a look of concern when he heard about the day's events. "The school called me too," he said gently as he joined them. "Sounds like you had quite the confrontation." Darius braced himself for disappointment, but his father continued, "I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right. Though next time maybe find a way that doesn't land you in detention." Darius, surprised, asked, "You're not mad?" His father laughed softly. "Not a chance. But I am concerned about this teacher. Ms. Winters is the worst," Darius confirmed. "But she's untouchable. Her students get into the best physics programs, so everyone overlooks how she treats certain kids." After a thoughtful pause, his father added, "Then maybe it's time someone didn't overlook it." Darius asked, "What do you mean?" With quiet conviction, Captain Johnson declared, "I think I should definitely participate in Career Day. In fact, I need to have a conversation with Principal Harrington to make sure I'm included." Vanessa gave her husband a knowing look as he turned to Darius and said, "That is, if you're comfortable with me being there." Without hesitation, Darius replied, "I'm more than comfortable with it. I think it's exactly what Westfield Academy needs." That night, for the first time since he'd transferred to the school, Darius slept without the constant knot of anxiety in his stomach. He knew that whatever happened with Career Day, his father would handle it with the dignity and excellence he had always shown. The following day, the atmosphere at Westfield shifted subtly but unmistakably. In the detention room, a cold, sparse space with bare walls, hard chairs, and a clock that ticked too loudly, Darius sat with his physics textbook open, though his mind was far from the equations before him. The memory of the heated confrontation, the sneering comments, and the injustice of it all fueled his determination. Meanwhile, Principal Harrington had called Captain Johnson in for a meeting regarding the Career Day arrangements. Darius, feeling a mix of anger and anticipation, looked up to see Sophia slipping into the seat beside him. The detention monitor, a bored-looking English teacher, barely glanced up from his novel as he asked, "What are you doing here?" Darius whispered back, "You didn't get detention too, did you?" Sophia shook her head and replied, "I'm supposed to be helping in the library. I just wanted to see how you're holding up." Darius nodded and said, "I'm fine. My dad's meeting with Harrington right now about Career Day." Sophia's eyes sparkled with admiration as she remarked, "Your dad sounds pretty amazing." Darius's tone carried a hint of pride as he responded, "He is. He was one of the youngest black pilots to make captain at Atlantic Airlines. Before that, he served in the Air Force, flew combat missions, and did everything with an unwavering resolve." Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. "And Ms. Winters had the nerve to call him a bus driver of the sky?" she exclaimed softly, her voice laden with sorrow and outrage. In that moment, Darius felt a surge of determination unlike anything he had experienced before. The injustice he had witnessed, the relentless cruelty of Ms. Winters and Tyler's taunts, and the cold indifference of a system that celebrated only the privileged, had reached a breaking point. He knew that this Career Day was not merely an event, it was an opportunity for a monumental rebuttal, a chance to expose the deeply rooted prejudice that had long festered at Westfield Academy. His father's decision to challenge the established order was not just a personal act of defiance, but a beacon of hope for every student who had ever been made to feel inferior because of their background. Darius could almost see the ripple effects of their stand. A future where excellence was measured by true merit, not by the color of one's skin or the weight of one's family name. As the day of the meeting approached, Darius's thoughts churned with both apprehension and fierce resolve. He imagined his father standing tall before Principal Harrington, not as a disgraced veteran forced to justify his legacy, but as a proud, accomplished captain demanding recognition and respect. He pictured the shock on Ms. Winters' face as her carefully constructed facade began to crumble under the force of truth, and he envisioned Tyler's smug grin fading into a look of disbelief when the entire school witnessed the undeniable power of determination and hard-earned success. In that vision, every whispered comment, every sneer, and every act of discrimination would be met with a resounding response that left the oppressors speechless. Darius Banks knew that the battle ahead was not solely his to fight. It was a battle for every student marginalized by an institution that valued pedigree over potential. With every heartbeat, his resolve strengthened, and he silently vowed that when the moment arrived, their collective voice would be heard. That career day would be the day when Westfield Academy, with all its traditions and prejudices, would finally confront the reality that true excellence comes from hard work, perseverance, and an unyielding belief in one's own worth. And as he sat there in that cold detention room, Darius Banks felt for the first time that he was not alone in his struggle. That his father's legacy, his own defiant stand, and the support of friends like Sophia were the seeds of a revolution that promised to shake the very foundations of the academy. Darius Banks slid his career day form across Ms. Winter's desk and said, "My father would like to participate." Ms. Winters glanced at the form and replied, "We'll see if we have room in the schedule." At that moment, Tyler stepped forward, boasting that his father was bringing prototype designs for the new Bennett 15 jet, while sneering, "Sorry, scholarship." Darius's heart pounded as he defended his father by declaring, "My father is a real pilot, responsible for hundreds of lives every time he flies." He reminded everyone that his father, Captain James Johnson, earned 3 advanced degrees, flew combat missions in the Air Force, and broke barriers long before Ms. Winters began teaching. Later, after an unjust week of detention and witnessing cruel discriminatory practices, Darius found comfort in a heartfelt conversation with his mother Vanessa and his father. At home, Captain Johnson revealed his plan to present a personal slideshow, sharing his journey from building paper aeroplanes to commanding Boeing 787s on transatlantic routes. Darius helped gather photos and flight maps, his pride mingling with determination. He imagined Ms. Winters' face when his father appeared in uniform, ready to expose injustice at Westfield Academy and crack the system. Darius Banks watched as his father, Captain James Johnson, prepared for the big day with determination. In the early morning kitchen, Darius found his father in his crisp Navy uniform, packing his flight bag for the presentation. 4 gleaming gold stripes on each sleeve and the Atlantic Airlines wings pinned above his breast filled Darius with pride. His father said, "Tomorrow I will show these students what true excellence looks like when earned through hard work, not handed out based on privilege." Darius recalled years of painful prejudice at Westfield Academy, where teachers like Miss Winters dismissed him and his peers while favoring wealthy students. As Darius entered the classroom, anticipation hung in the air. When Captain Johnson strode in, every eye turned and silence fell over the room. He began by sharing his journey from a hopeful young boy in Alabama to commanding Boeing 787 Dreamliners on international routes. He recounted his Air Force combat missions and the barriers he shattered. In that moment, Darius felt that long-standing injustice would finally be confronted with undeniable talent and retribution so magnificent it left everyone in awe. He knew that tomorrow the oppressive system would finally face genuine excellence, without fail. Darius Banks watched with bated breath as his father, Captain James Johnson, prepared for what would be the turning point at Westfield Academy. In the soft glow of early morning, Captain Johnson donned his Navy uniform, 4 gold stripes gleaming proudly, and packed his flight bag with quiet determination. He declared that today he would show the students that true excellence is earned through hard work and perseverance, not granted by privilege. During his presentation, he shared his remarkable journey from a young boy dreaming beneath an airport fence in Alabama to commanding Boeing 787 Dreamliners on transatlantic routes. His words pierced the classroom like a gust of wind, challenging deep-seated assumptions and racial biases. Every slide, from technical schematics to the heartfelt image of a hopeful child, struck a chord with every student, even forcing the once condescending Ms. Winters to reconsider her views. When questions poured in, from practical physics to personal struggles, the proud yet humble captain answered with clarity and warmth. The rigid hierarchy that had long separated the privileged from the overlooked began to crumble. In that transformative moment, Darius felt not only pride but also a stirring hope that the seeds of change planted by his father's courage would soon blossom into a future where merit, not background, defined success. Today, Ethan Marshall stepped into a transformed Westfield Academy, where old prejudices were shattered and every corner of the classroom echoed with a newfound hope. The memory of relentless humiliation from snide remarks by Ms. Winters and the smug taunts of Tyler Bennett still lingered, but now those times were on the verge of a dramatic reversal. Ethan's father, Captain James Johnson, had just delivered an electrifying presentation that left every student, regardless of background, spellbound. The captain recounted his journey from a small Alabama airport to commanding transatlantic Boeing 787s with precision and grace. His passionate account of overcoming racism and dismantling stereotypes not only silenced the detractors, but also ignited a fierce determination in every marginalized student. Ms. Winters, once a fierce enforcer of elitist traditions, now found herself forced to confront the errors of her ways as her classroom's hierarchy crumbled. Even Tyler's arrogant veneer began to fade as the undeniable truth of hard-earned excellence prevailed. The day ended with a powerful message that excellence is the ultimate response to discrimination, and every dreamer deserves respect. Please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more content that challenges perspectives and celebrates triumph over adversity.